kiss for you.
Today, in this long video, we're going to be answering the question of what's the best sports games for non-sports fans. This is looking at the modern renditions of the sport games that everyone probably knows and trying to find which one the best one is for people that are not necessarily into all the sport, zeitgeist and stuff, me included. I pretty much a clean slate. I did watch a couple games of various basketball games and football games throughout the years, but I'm pretty much coming at this completely neutral, not having any real sway one way or the other. However, I did play a decent amount of tennis in the early years in high school and college, but that is not anything in terms of like my affiliation with anything, or I'm not like a huge tennis nerd or anything like that. But I have played a more amount of tennis than anything else. And in terms of sports games, I pretty much just played FIFA 22 for like an hour and NBA 2K21 for an hour or so on the PS4 back in 2020. So that is pretty much it. Now, I'm recording this after I've already played all these games, so without further ado, let's just talk about it. If you were interested in finding out what the best sport game is for most non-sport fans, this is going to be my personal ranking. We're going to have two rankings, a personal and an objective. You can watch the rest of the video as well as the ranking at the end to find the objective ranking of these games, but this is my personal ranking, so here we go. This list here, as you're seeing it, is the personal ranking of what I believe are the games I'm going to be checking out and where I believe they rank in terms of personal enjoyment for each of them. This ranking is just based on my feelings for each of them and not any objective ranking, but as you can see, actually I want to, I grouped them. I want to move Madden up, actually. Where the hell is Madden? Why can't I find Madden? Yep, Madden. I'm going to move Madden here and PGA Tour down. Yeah, I think this is where I want it. Okay. So, first off, obviously, 2K25. I was quite impressed by NBA 2K25. And if you want to know why, you can check that section of the video where I talk about and go through all the reasons there. Next up would be F1. Again, you can check the video timestamps to see why I like that one. Topspin, Madden, FC, 2K25, and PGA Tour at the bottom here. This would be my list. So if you're like, okay, how do you read this? Top, most favorable, bottom, least favorable. So there's that. If you just wanted the quick rundown of which ones you should get, this is kind of my personal ranking here. I'm going to be ranking these by category. 4 categories here and then an extra category at the bottom. I'm going to be looking at things primarily relating to content, gameplay, which includes controls and tutorials, a technical side of the game, pricing and what the pricing of this stuff is, as well as can you play the older versions of the game and what support is that, what support does that have, and that is the age section. In terms of ranking, every category will get 5 points, up to 5 points, plus 2 additional points for the age category, for a total of 22 points. That will be total up at the end and laid out so you can see an objective ranking as best I can for which one would be the best. The reason I'm doing this for non-sports fans is because every single goddamn video I see on these games is from someone that is decked out in whatever memorabilia from the sport thing and is raving about all the players that I have no idea about. So I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at it from someone that has no clue about any of these and just likes to play basketball, right? Or wants a tennis game, for instance. So I think this video is going to be anywhere from like an hour and a half to 2 hours long, I think. So you can skip around into the sections as I talk about there. But I also want to say, thank you for watching this. If you are, it is one of the most time-consuming things I've done in a video. So if you are interested and want to see more stuff like this, I did one relating to MMOs, reviewing a bunch of MMOs. For that one, I also do game reviews and game highlights as well. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, I try and post once a week on this channel, a different variety of games and a new game every week to talk about. So if any of that sounds like fun, make sure to hit the subscribe button, comment, like the video, all that stuff. And let's go on with the video. Thank you for watching, and here we go. We're starting with FC25. Starting off the list here with FC25, and I will say that this game does have the most amount of content of any of the games on offer, which includes a very robust learn to play section, including a training center, a rush game mode, special game mode there, skills, minigames, and a practice arena, tournaments with a bunch of options, including Premier Leagues, Championship Leagues, Cups, and that kind of thing, an ultimate team mode, a manager and player career mode, a standard quick play kickoff stuff, as well as co-op and other online friendlies options, as well as a club or guild system. So overall, I would say of all the games, this definitely has the most amount of content and the most amount of social features if you're looking for something relating to that. So that is very good. I would overall, because of this, give content a 5 out of 5 on FC25. Next up, we'll be talking about the gameplay of FC25 in 2 sections. We'll be talking about the tutorials, controls, general gameplay, as well as some issues I have with controlling and responding to the game. Okay, the 4th time I'm trying to do this because I had the controller out of frame of my camera, which is always a good sign. So let's start this up. Okay, so what I wanted to showcase first off in this game, other than the fact that, as I mentioned before, it's constantly crashing and was hard to set up, is the really annoying movement that the game has, and I'm going to try and showcase this in the frame. Okay, and immediately have the ball taken away from me. So pretty much what I'm trying to show is that the movement of the game is technically realistic, but it's incredibly annoying to actually play. So let me just get the ball here, right? So I'm going up, and then I go to here, right? And I'm going this way, and I want to go up, right? Up, okay? And then I want to go back, and then I want to go this way. I'm running, and then I want to go up, and I stop and go this way, and then I want to go down, and it goes whoop, 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 whoop. So it's not very, this one, it's responsive is the wrong word to call this. I'm going the completely wrong direction. Responsive is not the thing that I would say that this game is, because it's not responsive. No, this way. Okay, so we're doing this, right? And then we're gonna go up, okay, and we're gonna go down, and 1, 2, 3 seconds, and back, and then we're gonna go down, 1, 2, 3, okay, back, and then we're gonna go 1, and we're gonna go 1, 2, okay, 2 seconds that time, and go back up, 1, 2, 3, and then go this way, right, down. Let's see if I can, wrong direction, of course. But that's kind of the thing there, is it's quite irritating. All right, so I'm gonna not show this now because that's quite difficult to do. I'm going left, and then I go up, and it takes a second, and I go down, 1, 2, 3. It's 3 seconds for me to switch directions, and it leaves this really annoying feeling like I can't control where the character is going. 1, 2, 3. Look at that. You can probably see, right? Okay, that's that way, and then I go back down, and that's that way, and then I go back down, and that's that way. It's a full 3 seconds for me to turn around to any capacity, and it makes it really hard to do pretty much anything in the game. Now, obviously, this is a thing that FIFA's had or FC's had forever, and it's just me not being used to it, but it makes the game from initial impression feel extremely unresponsive, and the game doesn't really know how to operate effectively, or maybe it's just a feeling of responsiveness in the game like this you would hope is there, that it isn't there, and it makes most of the basic movement in the game quite irritating to do. Similar thing with the shooting. So just pass over here. The shooting in the game does not feel super, and I missed it. Shooting game does not feel great. I'm awful at shooting, so that should not be a surprise. But just in terms of the feeling of the ball really feels like a shot put or a hockey puck or something. It doesn't feel like a soccer ball would. Now, obviously, this is trying to be somewhat realistic, but even then, you see considerably more velocity that the ball has. This ball feels very like a bowling ball or like a lead weight kind of thing. It's suction to the ground, and it doesn't work that well. All right, now we get to the biggest part of these games, which is obviously the gameplay. And as I mentioned in the first part where I talked about the controls and how bad they are, and that how kind of starts affecting the gameplay, we're going to also talk about the controls from a more technical perspective, which is actually how you end up playing the game. And again, I have recorded this after I've played all the games, so what I can effectively say at this point is FC absolutely has the most convoluted and irritating control scheme of all the games. Now, this may be because it's a more complex game than the others, or it could just be how the implementation is, but this game does not have the most normal control scheme. It may seem relatively simple with you having, your face buttons doing the stuff, and then you can augment them by the L and R bumpers. But there's a lot of things, and as you can see as I'm going through the control sections here, there's a lot of options for just basic controls and for advanced controls. And the issue is, because they're effectively all on different buttons, it's quite hard and not very intuitive on how to actually activate most of these. So you end up having either a chart, or I guess what most people do is they just play these every year and they get used to the controls. But for someone that's new, all these controls are very much overwhelming, especially when there's not a ton of feedback for most of these controls, like understanding, okay, that's what this one looks like or that one looks like. A lot of the other games have more visual, even more gamified ways to show what you're doing and if it's working. But because of the way this game kind of operates on a more like top-down or isometric view, it becomes quite difficult to actually figure out, what my buttons are actually doing or what benefit the buttons have. Right, in this game, if you're doing like a fake pass, it's quite hard to see the ball on the character because they're considerably smaller than something like an overhead pass in NBA or a lob shot in Madden, right? Those are much easier to see because they have different buttons associated with them, but also because they visually look different, and you can tell because of how big the players are. In this game, it's quite a bit harder to figure that out because the ball is relatively small, the feet are relatively small, and everything is happening in kind of a very top-down perspective. So the controls are definitely something that I would say is not an ideal setup for new players, especially if you haven't come from other football games before. So I just wanted to set that stage there for the controls. So let's actually just talk about the gameplay now. I'm going to start with things like tutorials, because that is an important aspect for people like me that don't necessarily aren't into these kind of games, maybe know about soccer/football, but don't really play FIFA or FC at this point. The tutorials are fine. They do a decent job, and there's some good examples of actually being able to showcase what's happening. But then there's other tutorials. It's not a very helpful way of doing tutorials, because it doesn't really give you much in the way of demonstrations, and nor does it really encourage you to use all these things together. What they do end up doing is like the sections where they'll have like, okay, fundamentals, you have these 5 things you can go through, drills, and then you have like a match. And there's like an objective, and it's like do this 25 times, right, kind of thing in a match. And that is trying to get you used to it. It's a decent way of doing it, but overall, I would prefer a much more demonstrative. I would prefer one that's like a little bit more guided, I guess, than what this one does, because this just feels very isolated. It feels like you're learning a lot of techniques and a lot of things to do, but nothing's really coming together. And especially, I think there's definitely a better way to do that in this, but I also will say that in the tutorial section, there are a good variety of tutorials. There's things like minigame and skill games. There's your practice arena. There's your more traditional drills. And then there's like your basic scrimmage arena, if you will, or like the setup for a match and things. So there's a good amount to learn the game, but I just would say that a lot of it isn't as necessarily well thought out as I would have liked it to be. So that is on the gameplay for the tutorial side. Getting into the main game itself, it's pretty good. I wouldn't say anything about it is striking me as like exceptional to any capacity. It's just pretty good. It's a functional game. Everything on it's like working as intended for the most part, but as I mentioned in my annoyance for the actual responsiveness of the game, that does take a lot of getting used to, and it still doesn't feel that good. Like, especially now coming from playing most of the other games, I'll tell you right now, Madden feels 100 times better than FC, and that's still by EA, right? So I'm not jumping over to 2K or anything. Even in EA's own wheelhouse of like F1 and Madden, those feel considerably better than FC does, just in terms of responsiveness and fluidity of the movement and being able to tell what's happening. Like FC, I guess a good comparison is like FC is like trying to lug like a tugboat or like a yacht or a giant ship across water and have it move. And things like NBA 2K and Madden feel like a jet ski. They feel extremely responsive and extremely fluid and function to you like it feels like an extension. FC feels like you're constantly fighting the controls to turn around and move and kick the ball and activate the buttons at the right time. So it's just something that I was kind of shocked about, because I remember this happening in FIFA 22, the purple one as well, where I was like kind of shocked. I'm like, okay, so this is not responsive and doesn't feel that good to do anything. And I probably scrapped this from one of the other audios I did on this, but the ball feels like a hockey puck or like a bowling ball or like a lead weight. It doesn't feel very fluid, right? compared to something like the basketball in NBA, which feels like a basketball, or the football, right? Like the ball here feels very grounded and not that soccer ball like, especially in a professional environment where you're kind of seeing the ball zip around and stuff. It doesn't feel like that. A lot of these things feel very stagnant, very slow, and not very realistic isn't the right word, because it probably is quite realistic. It's just not very engaging, I guess is the word. Like it feels quite difficult to do most things in the game, when other games that are still simulation based just feel a lot easier. There's less friction in that. So I would say that, well, the gameplay probably is very good if you are like intimately familiar with FC and how FIFA generally operates. If you aren't, like I wasn't, the gameplay is quite abrasive. And I would say, in terms of gameplay, as I'm kind of ranking these things, out of 5, I would have to give the gameplay like a 3 out of 5. And on an objective level, that's mostly because I know that this gameplay is what the people that play this game expect and want for the complexity of it. But I also think it's quite hard to say this is the best that football gameplay can be, and this is the best responsiveness and quality that the game can be. Especially when you are seeing other competitors and people trying to do that. I do think that there could be improvements here, seeing as what other teams are able to do with their other games and how good they feel. There's no reason that FC can't also be on that level. So that's that for gameplay, and then we'll go on to the technical, pricing, and age categories, which I talk about next. Installing this game, which I did through EA Play, which is their kind of like subscription thing where you can pay a little bit a month and get access to all their games. I did that through Steam. I installed the game, pretty normal, nothing wrong there. And then it responded after clicking play by crashing the entire computer. Hard crash, couldn't do anything, it just broke the entire machine. I was like, oh, that's really weird, so I turn it back on, off again. We're back in it. I click play again, and the EA app that installed immediately crashed, and I couldn't launch the game. I'm like, okay, so that's number 2. I go in, try and uninstall the EA app. It says it's running in the background, can't install, even though it is fully functional. So I have to re-download it from the website, delete the old one, uninstall that, reinstall the EA app fully, even though you shouldn't have to do this because it runs in like a mini client. So you shouldn't actually need to reinstall the actual EA app, but I did. I did that, click play. It almost crashes again, the entire computer, but it doesn't. It freezes for a good couple minutes, and then it responds with, I have a screenshot here of a security violation that happened, even though I don't have an antivirus or anything else running, or anything that would like hit the anti-cheat, but it says security violation, so that's annoying. So that's the 3rd time now that there's been an error. And then the 4th time, as I finally get into it, as you can see here, when I have it working, it wants me to do a bunch of sign-in stuff and sign in, and that doesn't work as well as it should because it's trying to like sync to my other EA account that I used when I connected to Game Pass, and it's trying to sync that one, so I had to sign out of that and sign back in and all this stuff. But I eventually got it working after all this time, but it is important to note that, this is a lot, and at this point, I've already played the other games, and I can tell you, none of the other games have this. Madden didn't have this, the other EA game, PGA Tour didn't, the 2K games didn't because they don't have a launcher. Like, none of the other games had this issue. It's just specifically FC that had this issue. Now, it's possible that it's because this is the first, one of these games I went through EA Play. Maybe that's affecting things, but I did want to let people know that, yeah, it's a problem if you're, like, trying this game out through EA Play on Steam or just through Steam in general, that this may become an issue where it, like, doesn't work and it freaks out. So I just wanted to lay that groundwork to say the first impressions of this game were not positive. All right, now we're on to the technical pricing and age of FC25. For a technical, as you can see on the screen in the top left, there is Review Tuner, which is determining the frames, how much memory and RAM it's using, the general frame time of the graph, and some other stats there that you can look at. I'm running a 4080 with a 3700KF. 32 gigs of DDR5, 5600 megatransfer for memory. Everything's running, all the games are running off of a Crucial P5 Plus 2 terabyte NVMe SSD. So none of my components are being bottlenecked, so the game should be running at its full capacity and nothing should be, hampering it there. And I say that to kind of preempt that, yes, this is a high-end, top-tier computer or desktop, but the ceiling for a lot of these things tend to be roughly around like the PS5 or Xbox Series X stuff, so you're not necessarily going to see dramatic differences, especially since a lot of these games come from consoles. They tend to either be frame capped or rate capped in some capacity. So like as you're seeing here, I don't have a rate limiter of any kind on this. I'm not using VSync or anything. And you're seeing about 120 FPS. And I think the biggest issue here that I have, especially as of right now recording, having played most of the games already with FC here, is that FC has quite a bit of fluctuation that the other games don't have. So you're seeing 120 here, but it can go down to 85, 65. The lowest I think I've seen it is about like 65. But it can go to 65, 85, 90, go to back to 120, 115. So it's not a very stable frame rate. And you'll really see that as it transitions from like normal out in the field gameplay to like a close-up of players and stuff. It's quite fluctuating when it has that. And as I mentioned in the gameplay section when we talked about controls, the frame pacing, and not necessarily the timing, like the delay on it, but actually just like how it feels to control the characters, plus this kind of fluctuating frame rate, do make an experience that I wish for what this game is and what it is offering. I wish it was better. Like, I wish the technical state was a little more solid across the board. It's not bad. It's definitely something where if I'm going to be rating them, as I mentioned in the intro, I'm going to be rating each of the sections here and giving it a score. I don't know what I gave the other content and gameplay one because it comes after, but if I were to give this one a score, it would probably be, for technical, I'd probably give it like a 4 out of 5. It's not perfect, but it's not bad. It definitely is very good. There's a decent amount of settings you can do to change things like graphical options and VSync and all that, so you can kind of adjust it to how you want it, which is very nice. Not all these games we're going to be looking at have that, so it is nice that you're able to change some graphical settings, some VSync stuff to kind of get it where you want it. But overall, I'd probably definitely give technical like a 4 out of 5 because those frame fluctuations are definitely a little bit irritating. So now we're going to go on to pricing now, and pricing is an interesting one because you really have to look. As I've mentioned, I haven't mentioned yet, this is the first game. I consider these games as live entry games. And what that means is effectively similar to something like a concert venue or a music festival or something like that. You pay an entry fee to get access to it, and then you take away what you get from it, and then that happens, every year, every couple months, whatever, right? I kind of view these games as that instead of like live service games because they come out every year, and the expectation is that you buy them every year and get that new experience, and none of your stuff from the previous years works anymore, right? That's kind of what I envision these games as. These are not live service games you kind of invest into like an MMO would be or other long-term games. These are live entry games. You pay a one-time anywhere from $70 to $150 for the entry fee. You get some snacks, you get some memorabilia, whatever have you from like a concert venue, and then you leave. That's what I kind of treat these games as, because if you treat them as a live service game, they're awful, and don't worry about it. But if you treat them as a live entry game where you're basically just paying for access to it for a certain amount of time and getting what you can from it and then leaving, I think that's a healthy way to envision this. All that being said, for pricing, the reason I kind of set this up is that sports games tend to be pretty expensive. They start off at about $70 and then they increase depending on how much Ultimate Team stuff you want and how much career stuff you want and bonuses and that kind of thing. However, they also tend to dramatically lose their price as it goes on. So with all the games we're going to be checking out here, most of them can be obtained for quite a large discount. I believe the discount for FC here is about 70%. So we're coming up on the new FC, I believe, in September. So it's in, at least time of recording, it's in like 6 weeks, but it'll probably be already out by the time this video goes out. Who knows? But so yeah, it's going there 26, and it's, $70 to $120, $130 there for that. But you can pick this one up for 70% off, about $14, frequently on both Steam and Epic. This is PC, obviously. I'm talking about all these games from a PC user. However, I also suspect and have seen those sales for Xbox and PlayStation as well. But that's $14, right? You can also, as I probably demonstrated already, you can get them through EA Play, which is how I'm accessing it. That's about $6 a month, or it's $40 a year, and you have access to all these games. The FC, Madden, F1, various, Jedi Survivor, that kind of thing. But you get access to those, and FC25, the most current one as of now, is included in that. So for $6, you can test it out and see if you like it, and it's like the full game, that kind of thing. And I think that's a pretty decent way of doing it if you just want to check this game out. But obviously, if you want to buy it, you can tend to find it for about $14. So that's kind of how the pricing of that works. Let's talk about age, which is something that is a smaller category, but definitely still important. To what degree can you play the old games? And I usually give full points if it's the back two, if it's like 2025, 2024, and 2023. If you can play all those and buy them, then that's very good. And if you can, it drops below, right? For age, I'm pretty sure all the FIFAs, maybe up until like FIFA 18, so like anything past that 18 mark are still playable, even if a lot of them for licensing reasons are not buyable anymore. So if you hop on like FIFA 20, I believe you can still play that online. Obviously, it's going to depend on how many people are online, but I believe you can still play that online, but you cannot buy it due to licensing. And this licensing is more specifically due to the fact that EA lost the FIFA license, so they can no longer legally sell things with that FIFA license. So that is important to note, that if you're trying to play like FIFA 23, for instance, you can no longer buy it. So if you have access to it, I believe the servers for that are still running, and they tend to run for a good amount. I believe they just shut down, as of like maybe last year, they shut down a couple of the older, like FIFA 16, FIFA 17, that kind of thing. But I believe some of the newer FIFAs are still accessible. So that is good. However, because you can't buy it, and age is a 2-point scale, I'm going to have to give this one a 1 out of 2. It does not fail completely because you can still play the old ones, but the fact that you can't buy them does make it a little bit more annoying. And the fact that they lost the license, meaning there's no hope that they will eventually put them back on the market. So that is there. All right, we've talked about gameplay, content, the technical pricing, and age for FC here, and now we'll be going on to the second biggest sports game on PC, which is NBA 2K25. I'm doing over the content section of NBA 2K25 because I just realized there's copyrighted music in the background of my live gameplay there. So I can't use any of it. I can at least use the video, but that's kind of annoying. Content in NBA 2K25, I would say, is pretty middle of the road, with one exception. There is your My Team, which is your standard Ultimate Team stuff, your My Career, an interesting My Eras, which is like a Dynasty mode that is quite cool. You have your Play Now, your My WNBA for that stuff, and then your Learn 2K and your Season. So I would say, well, the content is slightly above average compared to something like Madden or Topspin. It is definitely, I would say, a little bit below something like FC, where it has a little bit more social features in it. However, I do give it the edge up in terms of content. I would give it a 4 out of 5 instead of a 3 out of 5 because it does have that Eras mode that people quite enjoy, which is an additional single player aspect that was not in previous games. So in terms of content, I would definitely add that there. And I'm going to talk about Ultimate Team, or what is called Ultimate Team, in basically all these games because I think this is a good place to talk about it. I don't really necessarily see the issue with Ultimate Team because a lot of the other modes, like the Play Now and stuff, don't use Ultimate Team at all. I understand that a lot of people have issues with relating to how it's basically gambling and the monetization of it. But to me, Ultimate Team is an optional thing that you can decide to interact with if you want to, but it is not a crucial part of the game. It's effectively something that a lot of these people kind of harp on or kind of play in its main form. But to me, I understand the appeal of it, but I don't necessarily understand why people are so mad if people don't play it, right? There's a lot of fun to be had in the game that isn't Ultimate Team, so I just kind of wanted to make my statement on any Ultimate Team in any of these games, whether it be NBA, whether it be FC, F1, whatever, doesn't matter. Ultimate Team to me is like an optional mode, but it is not like the main thing, so I don't really care if people spend a bunch of money on it, right? That's just kind of what it is there. All right, we'll be going on to the gameplay now of NBA 2K25. All right, NBA 2K25's gameplay. This is where it really gets interesting. So personally speaking, I really like the gameplay of this game, not only because of how fluid it feels oftentimes in terms of how the characters move and everything like that, but also generally just how the gameplay operates in the control scheme of the game. Talking about control scheme, it is actually very intuitive, which I was quite surprised about. You have your shoot button, which is X, and that works on pretty much anything. You have your free throw shooting, which is in the middle, and that is pretty self-explanatory. You just press and hold the X button and wait until the little arrow goes into the thing there, like a rhythm game. And this X button works for a lot of things. So if you hold the I believe it's right trigger into an X, you'll do a layup, or left and X into a layup. And if you hold X and shoot from a perimeter, it'll do a perimeter shot. From up close, it'll do an up close, and from far away. So all that tracks there. And then you have your passing buttons, right? A is just your typical pass, B is your dribble or your drop pass, and Y is, I believe, overhead pass. And then for defending, you have your left trigger and movement, or left and right for shuffle. And then you have your RB button to quick select between your different players there to move there. And that's pretty much the buttons. You also have, obviously, swap outs and everything like that. But the control scheme is very intuitive. In fact, 2K games, what they tend to do is they drop you in a game to determine your skill level. And I did decently well for having never played an NBA game, or having not really played an NBA game in, 7 years or something like that? 5, what are we, 2025? 2020, early 2020 is when I picked up 2K21 for an hour. So I was quite impressed by how intuitive the controls were. Moving on to tutorials. There's a double-edged sword here, because while I really like the amount of tutorials you get from both a basic, advanced, your minigame selection, your skill game selection, a scrimmage, and a practice arena, the tutorials, similar to something like FC25, aren't super helpful in terms of actually getting you used to all the mechanics at once. However, they do a better job of doing that, because you have a little indicator that shows you a demonstration of how you can actually do some of these moves and kind of what you need to play with, right? And what you have access to, which I really appreciate, something that I don't believe FC had. So while they are similarly annoying in terms of how clinical they can feel, they at least give you a demonstration so you can practice, which is something that FC does not do. So I really do appreciate how, at least in its tutorials, you do get that option, as well as the tutorials being, roughly speaking, pretty well explained and self-explanatory, which is also very good. So moving on to the actual gameplay, now that we've established both controls and the tutorialization, the gameplay is very nice, and obviously it would be very nice, but that is really something that you do have to kind of hone in on, because as we've seen with FC, and as we'll see with another game coming up, gameplay does really take priority, and if it doesn't feel as good as it should, then it's going to be a huge detriment to that game. So the gameplay, both for its fluidity, as well as just how games operate, how the players operate, how they move around the field, and how natural that feels, the way and movement and the audio and stuff, they all combine to make a game that feels very responsive and, more importantly, very quick. This is absolutely the fastest paced game of all of them, just in terms of movement and things needing to be done in a certain space. It's not like FC where you're running around quite long distances or some other things. There is a good response here, and there's a lot of points being scored, and that is something that really does shine in the gameplay, where you're actually able to score and feel like you're making progress, and because of that, the fun factor of this game is improved because of that. So I would definitely award gameplay, NBA 2K25, a 5 out of 5. Moving on, we're going to be talking about the technical pricing and age of this game. The menus in this game are great, and you won't be able to tell because we're running at 60 FPS, but this menu here, just in the pause menu of a game, is running at 144 FPS. And if you saw my complaints of the menu of FC, oh my god, it's glorious, because FC's menu run at 30 FPS and they feel awful. I'm just zipping around here using Bip Bap Boop. I can go down all these. It's really fast, really responsive. It feels phenomenal. It's so nice to see this menu working at what I assume is a normal frame rate and functionality, and not being driven crazy by FC's menu, which I swear was it doesn't seem that bad. And then I was I could have sworn it was worse. And then in the middle of recording, it became considerably worse. So very nice to see that. I'm dubbing over this section because I'm suck at both delivering live gameplay and talking. So the original section was mumbly and not nearly loud enough. So the technical pricing and age of this, you're seeing the footage on screen now. Rock solid technical performance, at least in the scrimmage as well as the initial game I tried. Rock solid and locked 144 FPS. Very respectable use of both VRAM and RAM, as well as other things like that. If you missed the other sections, I have a 4080 3700KF, 32 gigs of DDR5, 5600 mega transfer memory, running off of a P5 Crucial Plus SSD. All that means is that you're not going to see any bottlenecks, so everything should be running at its max capacity. As with all the games I'm testing here, they're on max settings if they can be, and everything is running, usually speaking. I believe I'm running here with VSync on, but with VSync off, it also runs perfectly fine. I just didn't want any frame hitching for the video. So it runs very well there. And on top of the technical aspect of it, I do want to mention, I guess in this section, this is a very large game, and I would typically be very annoyed that this game is 140 gigs installed on the system, but seeing as it's one of the only games on this list that I would really say is a current gen feeling sports title, unlike some other ones like FC that feel very last gen, or even like Topspin and stuff, which also feel very last gen. This game feels very current gen. It feels very modern in the quality and level of detail in the players as well as the courts, and that is something that you obviously end up having to pay for in how big it is. So while it is annoying that it is 140 gigs and did take like 10 minutes to render all the shaders in, I'd rather it do that now and not have a problem later on than have it be a constant stuttering mess if it needs to like render shaders in. So the technical performance of this game is quite good and something to be impressed by, especially because it is using ray tracing and all that. And I'm using DLAA instead of any DLSS, so it is running at native 2K resolution, which is very nice. Overall, because of that, I would give technical a 5 out of 5. Pricing is an interesting one. I don't believe if I've mentioned pricing scores in the other ones I've done. If I didn't mention it verbally, I will on screen with a score, so just know that. But pricing is an interesting one because I picked this game up 86% off for $10, and I could get the all-star version of the game, which is, all the virtual currency and the stuff for my team for $20, and it would usually be $100. Now, obviously, that is because, as I mentioned in the FC part and other parts, I consider these live entry games, not live service games, meaning that you pay effectively an entry fee, $70 to $150, and that gives you access to something like maybe a concert venue, right? For a comparison. You do everything there, you get your stuff, you buy some more stuff if you want, and then you leave. That's what I consider these games to be, and with that being said, I think the $10 price, the $20 price for this is very good. It's not amazing in terms of like, would it be better if it went on sale sooner? Sure, but I think for the quality of the game you're getting in terms of the gameplay, this is absolutely a very good pricing model. Obviously, with all the games like this, you can buy various boosts and things to help you out, but none of that feels super needed. So now we're going to be going on to the age of the game, and this is going to be an interesting one because I gave FC in this category, I think a 1 out of 2, because I said that, well, you could play the other older FIFA games because of the licensing issues. You actually couldn't buy them because they couldn't sell anything with the FIFA thing on them. And then I give Madden a 0 because you couldn't even buy the previous Madden game on Steam. It was just not accessible. So let's see what I give this one. Can you buy the previous NBA 2K game, 2K24? The answer is yes, you can still buy 2K24. There's about 2,000 people online, and its lowest price was $10. Currently sale for $60, right? It's currently full price, but the fact that it did go down, July of 2024, which I believe is about when the new one came out. Obviously, it's not going to be on sale anymore, so from pretty much August of 2024 to current now in July 2025, it's been $60, so it's probably not going to go on sale, but you can at least buy it if you wanted to, and the servers are up. So I do consider that a success for age because you can still buy it, unlike some other ones. Let's go back and see, can you do NBA 2K23? NBA 2K23 is no longer available and has been retired, unfortunately, but it does appear by the 750 people in-game that you can actually get access to it in terms of like being able to actually play it. So that is good. I would consider at this case, because you can buy the previous one and still play the one before, I would consider that a success and give that a 1.5. My criteria for a 2 would be that both the previous 2 years would be accessible, but considering that is not the case, I think a 1.5 out of 2 is good for the age section here. With that being said, we are now leaving the aspect of the 2 most popular sports titles on PC, and we're going to America's favorite one, which is Madden on PC. So that is up next. We're looking at the content of Madden 25. So for the actual content itself, I would say that this lands pretty healthily in the middle of the pack. It is not exceptional in terms of the amount of content, but it is definitely very, I would say, thought through in terms of what it's being added and what isn't being added, as well as kind of the interesting spin they take on this compared to other games that I've seen. So you have your Ultimate Team kind of aspect there. You have your career mode and franchise. You have your player career specifically in Superstar, and then you have your quick play and your learning and all that. So I would say overall it is a decent selection of content. However, it is not something like crazy. They didn't do anything like wild that you haven't seen before. That being said, I was impressed with the Superstar mode, which is the like player career mode. Not only for the fact that it included a player career mode, which FC also did, but some other games do not, compared to like their team mode or the team career. But I was also kind of interested in how they set this up. So it's kind of going through all the stages of the career. Most of the other ones that are just career basis are just like you create a character, and then you go into like a bunch of matches and you can kind of do like the contracts or the tactics. This one actually has a little bit more of like the training aspect. So you'll start in your element there, and you'll have to do a couple training to basically boost up your stats. And the Superstar mode more so acts like an RPG light or a training simulator, like almost like a monster raising game, if you will. Something like Monster Rancher, for instance, or Umumusame, or any of those other kind of monster raising games. Similar style there, where you train up and you gain better stats to be able to get new abilities that help you out in the main game. So I thought that was quite interesting, both from a just design perspective of it being a little bit different, but also just the variety that it adds to the gameplay. You start off and you're lifting weights and running and trying to get the timing right on the dodges and all that. And then you go in and you have to do a little bit of trivia, which I suck at, so I just got 50% random choosing, right? And you have other things that kind of prep you on top of just the tactics and things that you can do that kind of prep you for the career. So I thought that was quite interesting and unique compared to other games, which tend to just be pretty basic. They pretty much just have like a normal career, as I mentioned before. This was relatively unique in that aspect, so I thought that was worth highlighting. All the other modes, like the Ultimate Team, are pretty standard. Same thing with the normal franchise mode and all that, but the Superstar mode is a highlight in terms of game variety that I did want to mention. For content, I would probably put this in like a 4 out of 5 camp, where it's pretty good. I wouldn't say anything that here is necessarily lacking, but if they did want to add more modes or more options here, that would definitely be appreciated to increase the value of the package, because I believe, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the pricing section, I don't think this game goes on sale as frequently or as much as the other games here. So that in terms of content for value kind of thing, you do have to keep that in mind. But now we'll go on to the gameplay of Madden, because obviously that's pretty important. All right, we're looking at the Madden gameplay. So I would say the Madden gameplay, first off, as we start with the controls, is quite well designed from a control perspective. Unlike something like FC, where I had a lot of complaints relating to how poorly that felt to play and the responsiveness of that, as well as the complexity of the controls, Madden has a much simpler control scheme just in terms of your available options, but I wouldn't say that it is any less interesting than something like FC would be. It just kind of lays the groundwork a little bit better. The controls are somewhat variable depending on what you have options for, but broadly speaking, you can use the face buttons. You have A, X, Y, B, and your right bumper, and those will pass to any available option, and then you have those corresponding buttons to effectively get the catch. So you have your buttons are somewhat the same, so like you'll start off by pressing A to initiate it, and then let's say a person comes around the side, you can press their corresponding button, it'll be above their head, so like you can press X, and then if you need to catch it, you have a couple of different catch options based on whatever button you want to do there, and that will determine what that is. And then you have obviously your kind of running buttons, pretty standard right there, and your D-pad to change tactics and all that. So I would say, generally speaking, the controls are well laid out and are relatively intuitive. Not necessarily that they're easy, but that they are intuitive, which is definitely very good. Moving on to the actual tutorials now. That's pretty well laid out in terms of tutorials, in terms of like what you have options for. Nothing is too obtuse. Everything kind of works well. It's kind of well laid out in terms of showcasing how many things are in each section and kind of like the importance of the section by how large it is. It does have a new to Madden section, which I really appreciate, something that NBA also has. And I really like that because it's not only saying, hey, are you new to the sport, but are you new to Madden specifically and how Madden kind of operates, which I appreciate. The tutorials are succinct and well laid out. They describe what they're doing pretty well. The only issue I had was actually figuring out the timing of the button stuff, but that is on me. That is not something that the game is failing to do. But I will overall say the tutorials are definitely very good and much better than the kind of sterile, not very helpful tutorials that something like FC has. So that's definitely a plus there. For the actual gameplay itself, it's a pretty standard, football stuff. But because the controls work well and they are extremely responsive, something NBA also shares with this game, controls are very responsive. I was actually impressed by how responsive they felt, which we'll get to in the technical side as well. That kind of leads into it. But controls are very good. Things move like how you expect them to. The buttons feel and they respond well. There's not a lot of input delay on them or anything. And so actually moment to moment playing this game is quite good. Things feel like they are and how they should be, which again you think is a basic requirement, but as I mentioned with FC, that is not always the case. So I would say the gameplay is definitely a highlight of this series. And if you're looking for a football game, I don't know many others that are trying to do kind of this style. Madden in general has not had the highest caliber of modes or mode complexity. And I can definitely see that if you're coming from something like FC or other more complicated sports games. This is definitely on the easier side, but that is more so just the fact of what they decide to do with the control scheme and not necessarily all the strategic options. Madden is a lot more about setting up plays and getting your team into position than it is about actually being able to execute the button presses at the right time, right? It is sort of about that because of the way the control is just in terms of needing to press buttons at the right time, but it is less focused on you being able to actually use your bank of knowledge to do that and more about positioning and getting plays, which I do think helps for this kind of game, not only from a just fun factor, but also being more accessible. You don't have to spend hours and hours figuring out what controls you want to use for what thing. You can just start in and start playing the game, which is a good highlight. Because of that, I would give gameplay a 5 out of 5. The only thing I would necessarily say that could be a detriment is if you like things that... so the other thing is that I was going to say if you like things a little bit more complicated than this, there's not really an option for it, but there is. At the start of the game when I launched it up, it asked me what kind of mode I wanted to play the game in, and I chose simulation mode. There were 3 modes. There was arcade, simulation, and I think a pro mode. So if you want a more dynamic or involved system, you can just change the modes. I don't think any of the others had this. Or at least they didn't have it out of the gate and as easily understandable as this one did. Obviously, all these games have a bunch of different control knobs and stuff that I didn't really get into because it's a lot. But this game makes it easy. It's hey, do you want to play this game like an arcade game, like a simulation, like a professional? What do you want to do? So I just chose simulation because it was the default, because I wanted the relatively default experience. But if you want to make it easier, you can do arcade mode, and if you want to make it harder, you can do pro mode. So I really appreciate that, and it's something I haven't seen in these other games really trying to do. So for that reason, among other things, the gameplay gets a full 5 out of 5. So now we'll go on to the technical, pricing, and age. Starting off with technical for Madden 2025. This game runs very well. I have the Rivia tuner up in the top left. If you did not see the 2 previous sections, this is related to PC performance specifically, so I'm not looking at console performance, I'm checking PC. For the PC, I have a 4080, 3700 KF, 32 gigs of DDR5, 5600 megatransfer memory, all running on a Crucial P5 plus 2 terabyte SSD. These are all installed too, so none of the things in my system are going to be a bottleneck. That's important to know because, a lot of the time in PC, an excuse can be made for performance because you don't have a strong enough PC. This is a top-of-the-line PC other than the 50 series, which didn't even exist by the time that these games were out, so there's no excuse there. That being said, I am quite impressed by the technical performance of this game. It is a rock-solid monitor refresh rate of 144 if I cap it to that. If I don't cap it to that, you can get a slightly higher. I don't have it capped currently because I did want to see kind of how it fluctuates at the high end. And so you can see when not a lot's going on, you can get 400 FPS, but if you cap it to 144, it pretty much stays locked for the most part to that. Things feel extremely responsive, very low input latency, all that stuff. You can see from the top left there the stats checking on top of frame rate, It's doing things like the like temperature, the utilization of each of the things, the VRAM, all that. And as I mentioned in the NBA one, it is going to obviously depend on if you have high amounts of RAM and high amounts of VRAM in your graphics card, because as you can see, it is taking like 20 gigs of RAM. So if you have 16 gigs, then you could see lower performance. But overall, I would say that this does scale very well. And given the fact that it is only about like 55 gigs, which I usually don't mention the space things take up, but this game does look, I would say, a decent bit better than something like FC does, while taking up the same amount of space. So I do appreciate that. Speaking of settings, there is a decent amount of settings relating to adjusting the quality of things, adding or disabling VSync, resolutions, all that. So I would say it's definitely a very pretty good menu selection there. Not amazing, not anything groundbreaking, but definitely better than some other games, which we'll get to. But yeah, so for technical, it's very good. And I would probably give technical a 5 out of 5 because I haven't noticed anything that's glaring or an issue. However, obviously, it will depend on how much VRAM and how much RAM you have in terms of like performance stuff. Going on to pricing now. For pricing, this game is interesting because, as I said, you can get it on EA Play for $6 a month, $40 a year if you do the yearly there. However, I don't believe that Madden goes on sale as frequently or for as low of a discount as these other games do. For instance, FC goes on about 70% discount. I believe NBA goes on like 85% discount sometimes. I want to check, and we can check actually on SteamDB right now, what the level that Madden goes on. I'm pretty sure Madden 25 is less. So let's check price history. Right now, it's on sale for 80% off. Okay, so I am wrong. Typically, what I see is that this game is like $23 or $24, which is still a decent deal, but it does appear that it is finally going on higher of a sale at $14 currently at the time of filming. It does look that, however, that this is a relative anomaly. It does appear that when it started selling in May of 2024, the first sale where it got down to like $24, $22 was January 2025. So it did take about 8 months there to do that. And then it went down to $14 in the spring sale for Steam at least. And it has stayed there throughout the 2 other sales. So it does go on a decent bit of sale, which is nice. Previous Maddens definitely didn't. They definitely were a higher end yield there. But it is nice that you can get this game for $14 currently. Over the usual $70. So I would say that is definitely a very good amount that this game is on sale for, which I am quite impressed by. So in terms of pricing, obviously, as I mentioned before, these things tend to be, I believe, live entry games, which means that like you're paying a one-time fee to get access to this stuff and taking away what you can from it. I think if you view these games like that, you'll have a better time. But that's just something to note. But at $14 currently where you can buy it, this is a absolutely well worth and well priced package. So I would give pricing a 4 out of 5. Age is an interesting one because it's all dependent on can you buy the previous versions of the game or not. In this case, we'll be looking at Steam. Can you buy Madden NFL 24? The answer is yes and no. The answer is no. I can just check Steam directly actually for this one. Let's see. Can you buy Madden 24? You can no longer buy Madden 24. Or it's just not showing because I have an EA thing. Let's see. This is odd. I think, at least according to Steam, if you're on EA Play, you can play this game and there's 110 people on Steam, for instance, right? But I'm not seeing a current price here, which does make me think that you can't actually play it normally. Let's check Madden 23. Can you play that? It does say NA at a lowest price of $18. And let's check Steam here if you can play Madden 23. Madden 23 is what? Not even on the books? If I just type in Madden 24, nope, 23 isn't on the books. I'm going to have to give age a 0 out of 2, considering you can't even buy the previous Madden 24, from what I can tell. So you don't get any points for age there, because unlike some other games where at the bare minimum you can at least buy the previous version, even if it's like full price or something, it doesn't look like you can even buy Madden 24. All right, next up we're going to be talking about a game that not a lot of people have been playing, but it's one that I think would surprise you. In my case, it surprised me because of how disappointing it was. Unfortunately, we're talking about Topspin next. One thing I'm going to be adding here is a note on community, because I do think it's kind of important, and this is going to be going for all the games tested here. And I didn't really talk about it, but it is something that I've definitely noticed. It's probably going to come up in the comments of this video. It's going to come up in various posts I've done about it and all that. But I did want to mention it because I asked on a couple of these subreddits for these games, specifically for this version, what would you recommend of the game series for non-fans? Just try and get the other kind of community sentiment on it. And I asked, basically that, like, if there's a lot of complaining on the subreddit, and so what would you recommend for non-fans? And the number one answer I got, basically, was that, don't worry about the community because it's the worst part of the game, and so if you pretty much just ignore that, then all the games are good, right? It is kind of the sentiment I got, at least from the NBA Madden ones. And I found that fascinating because that isn't really something I kind of thought about or kind of really paid much attention to, is that kind of community aspect, because it's not something I really engage in. But I guess if I'm doing something relating to, trying to at least somewhat review all these games, I should talk about the community. And that is, I guess, to say, if you want to engage in the community aspects of this game, whether it be through like voice chat or through online forums or discussions or what have you, just be prepared that, at least from what I've seen, coming from an outside perspective, the community on most of these games is pretty volatile in terms of like their sentiment towards the game and how they react to certain things and how they react to new players and all that. And I did kind of want to make this like note to pretty much say, if you're going to engage in these social features more so than me, which is basically none, I don't have voice chat on, I don't have any of the engagement stuff on, I don't join a guild, and the ones that have guild options, I'm not really that kind of person. I'll play online, anonymous matches and stuff, but I'm not really into that kind of social stuff. But if you are, just be worried that it's definitely pretty volatile and pretty toxic some of the time. It might depend. But if you're new and coming into this, definitely don't take the community's sentiment of every game being awful circa 2016 or whatever, since 2016, as being like a gospel, right? The community in a lot of these games can definitely seem like it's like the all-knowing God of how this game works because they play it forever as basically their only game. Don't take that as something that is like actually true, right? Like the NBA people saying that every game since 2016 has sucked and you shouldn't play any of them, and the same thing for Madden, same thing for NHL, and blah blah blah. Like it's not a very healthy mindset to be in. So I would just say ignore that if you can. Do take the community's notes into mind because they are people that play this game a lot, but don't make those notes that you have about them, don't make them something that you follow to the ends of the earth, right? These are people that, as they've said themselves, have thousands of hours in these games and play them every year and put a bunch of money into them. They're most likely speaking not going to be the same kind of crowd that you are in if you're picking up these games as a kind of casual fan, either of the sport or just of the sport game in general. You probably aren't going to be in that camp, so don't necessarily worry about all the things they're complaining about. Just in general, I'm not going to say disregard them, but definitely keep in mind that what they're complaining about after thousands of hours and hundreds of dollars and all that stuff is pretty specific to their issues with the game and don't necessarily affect you. So I just kind of wanted to make this note for the community for all these games, no matter what it is. NBA and Madden are the two that I contacted directly for their info on the game and the stuff, but for any of these games, depending on, especially for FC and NBA because of the two popular ones, at least on PC, don't take their community as like dead to rights kind of thing. Don't take it as something that you need to follow religiously. Don't get into the kind of hive mind mindset, if you will. So that's it for the community section, and thank you, and we'll move on to what's next. All right, we're starting off with Topspin's content, and this is quite unfortunate. To be honest, I was quite disappointed with Topspin in general, not necessarily because I was expecting something better, but because I was just expecting something with a little more thought put into it. Topspin's content is what I would probably consider the lowest of all of these, and they 2 out of 5. You have 3 modes: your online World Tour mode, your exhibition match, and your my career, and then a training. That is it. You don't have an ultimate team. You don't have an extra eras or anything like that. You don't have any other like training aspects or any other like RPG systems. You pretty much just have the online mode, the exhibition matches versus AI, and learning stuff on top of like the my career. And the my career isn't anything special. It's not surprising because I knew that Topspin was going to have a relatively lower amount of content because it wouldn't have an ultimate team relative mode or any of the extra stuff because it's not being based on a previous game. There are other Topspin games, but they are considerably older. This was kind of a revival, and so the expectation was it was going to be somewhat content light and just have the career mode and the exhibition stuff. But overall, the reason it's unfortunate is, and I give it a 2 out of 10 instead of a 3, is because the online aspects of the game, from what everyone's been saying, are completely screwed up. Biggest issue is that because you can technically pay to win in this game in terms of buying boosters, get stats quicker, the matchmaking is not working in this game to where you will get players that are considerably higher level than you and stat based than you, and you'll be able to do nothing about it and you'll just lose. So people have been harping on that, and that is why the players went from a decent 4,000 to basically no one, is because that people really don't like how that operates. And that is related to content, right? The main thing you're doing if you want to play this online is going to be significantly hampered by that matchmaking process, which is unfortunate. So I would give the content a 2 out of 10, not only because there is a lack of it compared to the other options available, but also because that online is continuously broken. But we'll be going on to the gameplay for some good aspects. Luckily, even though the content is a disappointment, the gameplay of the Topspin here is quite good. There is one issue, which I'll mention up front, and that is the fact that a lot of the sort of availability for the hitting, which is the main thing you're doing, feels very lackadaisical, which is just careless and lazy. It feels very rough in terms of like why they decide to use a kind of random placement marker, as you can see there. Obviously, it's not super random in terms of like you can change it and make it go better in your favor, but it's just a really weird way to set up this kind of system. I would rather have a more golf system or a more NBA system where it's more rhythm or timing based rather than whatever the heck this system is. It just feels very weird and obtuse. Not necessarily an issue, but it's definitely something in terms of the gameplay that's a little odd. In terms of controls, it is relatively simple. You have your movement, which is just the left stick. You can sprint by holding in the triggers. Your A is your standard hit, and then you have obviously lob, slice, and then drop, shot. You have your movement, and you have like a slide, and I'm pretty sure that's it. You can angle stuff if you want, but overall the controls are relatively simple, which does lend this a little bit more of a pick up and play feel than some of the other games, which is a benefit. Now on to the tutorials part of it. Part of the gameplay. Tutorials are similar to something like FC in the fact that they are a little bit too clinical. They're fine, they do decently well and teach you what the options are. They do give you a demonstration. Unfortunately, it is a forced video watch demonstration. It is not something you can like mimic or anything, but it is at least demonstration to showcase what you need to do. But it is not, I don't believe, something you can continuously replay. I believe it's something that pops up at the start, and it's like, okay, now your turn kind of thing, and then you do it. But it is something, I believe they're pre-rendered videos as well, because the capture looks a little weird when I render them. So that's just important to note that there are tutorials, and they do the standard tutorial stuff. And if you want to watch a demonstration of it, you kind of can, but it doesn't really like give you like the button prompts or anything. It's just like a video, which isn't that helpful because the entire point of most of these games is like timing and positioning and stuff, which it doesn't really show you because it's just showing a video. So that's a little disappointing, but overall I'd say tutorials are fine. And then we go on to sort of the more acute gameplay fundamentals of it. Things feel good. They do feel good. They feel responsive. They feel nice. The hitting and the sound effects and all that are accurate and are like correct, and they feel good. But there's nothing really special here, which is what I was kind of hoping for. A lot of the time you play these games and they don't seem that good, and then when you actually play them and get into them, like what I'm doing with DK Bonanza currently. They're like considerably better and they feel way better because you're actually doing it. This game really doesn't. You can kind of get the feeling of this game by just watching someone play it, which isn't necessarily something ideal. So overall for gameplay, I would probably give it a 4 out of 5. There's nothing wrong with the gameplay here, but it is kind of a little bit odd the way they set it up. So we'll go on to the technical, pricing, and age of this game. The technical aspects of this game are unfortunately quite disappointing, not because it runs poorly or anything, but because it doesn't look that good in terms of like visuals, and there's not many settings to actually change much of the things. There's just high and low looks god-awful, and high looks not that much better, and there's not many other settings to mess around with. But also because of the fluctuations that I often see, hitting about anywhere from like 120, going down to like 80 at some points. It has the same issue that like FIFA does, FC, or FIFA in general, where like it's decent performance, but you'd expect better for how bad the game looks at times, or how fluctuating the actual frames are. Nothing in terms of latency, but definitely odd in terms of frame fluctuation. That does make it a little bit weird, especially considering games that run much better than this, like Madden and NBA, are also in the same kind of realm. It's like if you're competing in this space, you need to have good performance, and this game has decent performance, but overall nothing crazy. So because of that, I would give the technical side of this game a 3 out of 5, because while it is very similar to something like FC, at least FC has more options for you to change things in terms of like how the game displays graphics and options like that. There's considerably less options in this game, so it deserves a less point because you can't customize it to maybe change some of the issues and frame rate problems there. Going on to the pricing. This is an interesting one, and I'm going to give full 5 out of 5 points here for pricing because this game has had a permanent and sharp price decrease from a $60 or $70 game back when it released April of last year to being a $20 game, and it was on sale for $15. So while that doesn't necessarily excuse all these issues I'm having, a permanent price drop to $20 and the fact that you can still play it at that price is very nice, and that is something that should be applauded. That hasn't happened to any other sports games that I know of. So it's $20 as a main base price, and it has gone down to $15. So that is very good there, and the fact that all the DLC, the All Access Pass that gives you all the like Battle Pass stuff is $10 as well, is quite nice. So that is to be commended there in terms of pricing. As I mentioned with the other ones, if you are new to this section specifically because you're like skipping around the video, these games I consider as live entry games, meaning not very you pay a one-time price. It's like a concert venue kind of thing. You take it or leave it. These are not live service games. You're not investing into this as a service to play for 10 years. This is something you're just going to be getting in and getting out. So I'd say any price that's lower than the full admission fee is worth it for most of these games, and because this one being a permanent sharp price decrease to a reasonable amount does make me kind of forgive some of the issues that the game has. Not all of them, but definitely some of them. So there's that. Age is a very interesting one here. And I don't really know what to score it because there aren't really other Topspin games that you can like play because it's been so long. Like there aren't any other Topspin games on Steam. The last Topspin game was 2011 or something. So instead, what I'll do is I'll recommend alternatives if you want something similar. There's a game called Tiebreak Plus, which is apparently people like that, and that came out recently and has decent reviews. Well, mixed reviews, but it has decent enough reviews in terms of what people are commending it on. AO Tennis 2 is another one. People seem to, let's see, do they like that? Nope, also still at a medium. Well, okay. No one likes tennis, I guess, but those are, I'd say, the two biggest options in terms of if you're trying to get tennis to some other capacity. Because in terms of age, I mean, this is the only Topspin game available currently. So if you want to play a Topspin game, this is pretty much your option. It is, however, $15. So I would say age, I mean, I would have to give it 1 out of 2. Can't give it full because you can't play the previous versions of the game. But I do have to give it something as it is the current version of this game. And I would suspect that they're probably not just going to remove it when a new one comes out because it's the only other version. So this ranking may change if that does happen. But for right now, we'll just give it a 1 out of 2 for age. So that's pretty much the wrap there on Topspin. Next up, we're going to something that not a lot of people may expect. Let's talk about PGA Tour, the EA golf game. So PGA Tour is the next game we're looking at, and for content, I would say that this is 4 out of 5. I would typically give something like this in terms of the amount of content a 3 out of 5, but I decided to increase it because of the amount of courses that are in this game. There's about 40 totally unique 18-hole courses in this game, on top of a lot of challenges, not only from the current selection of cups, but also the previous one that you can get from the challenges section in something called the Vault, which has a substantially large amount of options for challenges and just like little quests and things that you would typically not find. So I give this an edge just in terms of the amount of challenges. These aren't just like, 10 challenges, easy, medium, hard kind of thing. These are like hundreds of challenges in certain disciplines or certain events that are specific to the game and to actual events that happen in real life and that kind of thing. And so I think for that, it definitely gets the edge there. But just in terms of modes, you have your standard career mode, you have your quick play, you have your like online options and tournaments and that kind of thing, and then challenges, as well as your like learn how to play option. There's no like ultimate team, and there is no like player career. There is a normal career, but there's not like a team or anything like that for this game. You can, however, play against an AI opponent, golf, as well as like individual or like solo play. You can kind of work on it like a personal best or a trial run if you want. So I think in terms of content, this game definitely gets a 4 out of 5 relating to that. So we'll go on to the gameplay. PGA Tour's gameplay is quite interesting because there's a lot of settings, like with most of these games, you can do to adjust how difficult you want it and how simulation-based you want it, which I always appreciate. However, what I have kind of settled on in terms of like the basic functionality here, it does work pretty well, I would say, in terms of things like controls. As we'll get into, the controls are actually quite good, and more importantly, they are labeled, so you never have to like forget and remember what you have to do for what thing. Like games like this often do, they're always on screen. So if you forget, okay, what's the button to like view the field? That's Y button, right? What's the ability to start shooting? That's A. So like those kind of things are pretty self-explanatory, and they're like well laid out there. The overall UI design, I would say, is also quite normal and like not weird and very descriptive in terms of like what you need. So that is very nice. In terms of tutorials, you have the challenges and the basic stuff. They are similar, however, to something like FC1, where they're very sterile and don't really give a good demonstration of what you need to be doing. So I would, the tutorials are nothing special, nothing to write home about, but they get the job done. And there are tutorials in the game. So if you need help figuring out the controls or anything like that, they do a decent job. But it's really the challenges in terms of like the content there that really stand out for gameplay. For the actual gameplay itself, it does feel quite responsive. I had no issues there trying to like get my ball running or starting up or being able to view the field or any of the camera controls. All that works pretty well. But I overall can't really give gameplay more than a 4 out of 5 because of just sort of the lack of involvement that you often have in what you're doing. Like, it's very set up and let go kind of game versus other ones which you may have a little bit more active agency in. So I can't really give the gameplay, even on its own merits, anything more than like a 4 out of 5, just because of how it's decided to set up some of the controls and some of the swinging mechanisms and stuff. I definitely think could definitely be like improved. So the gameplay gets a 4 out of 5. Next up, we'll be talking about the technical pricing and age of the game. So this is a hard one for technical because while I do believe that a lot of the courses that are on screen do look pretty nice, the technical performance is in a similar area to where the FC one was, and I gave that one, I think, on performance, or I think I gave that one like a 3 out of 5 or like a 4 out of 5. I think I would probably put this one a little bit less, just because there's a lot less going on, and so there is less of an excuse for things to not be running as they should. There is significant lag and latency spikes when it's trying to load various courses and when it tries to pan over to like audience and stuff, which I think is kind of rough considering the game doesn't look that great overall. But I will say there is a decent amount of settings, so they kind of balance out in terms of like you can change it to make it run better on your computer, but for the type of game that this is, it definitely should be running into as many lag spikes as it is for the kind of game that's like operating at. There's not a ton of people constantly moving. There's not a lot of movement in general, right? Because it's golf. But so you'd expect it to be buttery smooth, and unfortunately there is a good amount of frame hitching which is unfortunate. So I can't give technical any more than like a 3 out of 5 here for that. Moving on to pricing is an interesting one. I believe, what did I get this one at? PGA Tour. Let's see, EA's PGA Tour. It's just called PGA Tour. I got it. Lowest price was $7. I believe. Let's see. It went on sale very frequently and still goes on sale, meaning it's still being sold. Let's see. What did I probably get it at? I got it at $10, was it? I think it was $13 or $14. I want to say it was spring 2024 at like $14. It's been on sale for $10 on the Farming Fest for some reason. It was $10. Steam Scream Fest for some reason was also on $10. Winter sale for $13. Looks to be $14. So it looks to be, as of last year, running for about $14, but it did get a historical low of $9.78. Obviously, it started out at $70. So I would say definitely, again, these are live entry games, meaning you're not going to be investing in something for the long term. I would say that this is a very fair price for this game, even though the content isn't necessarily anything groundbreaking. There is enough here in the gameplay, as well as the amount of courses and challenges there to really dig your teeth into if you want to get into that, especially for that $10 to $14 price point that game is at. So I would definitely say the pricing gets a 4 out of 5. Not necessarily a 5 out of 5 because there is still the monetization of various things and XP boosters, but pricing gets a 4 out of 5. Last thing we have is age. And this is a tough one because similar to Topspin, there have been other EA PGA Tour games, but they're like really old, like 20 years old or something at this point. So the only other comparable you have is like 2K's PGA Tour and the games that they've had going. So in terms of age, because you can't buy the previous one, I can only give this a max score of 1 out of 2 because you still can buy this game and it's about 2 years old at this point, so it's getting a little bit older here, but you can still buy it and it does still frequently go on sale for about $10. So in terms of age, I would say that it's a little bit better than some of the other ones, but because you can't buy the older versions of this specific PGA game, I would say it can't get any higher than a 1 out of 2. So that is it for golf here, and we will be moving on to, I believe, F1 next. F1 2025 or F1 25 is a fascinating one in terms of content, because while I do say and did say that FC 25 has the most amount of content, I do still believe that F1 25 here has the most concrete and sort of cohesive content. F1 2025 has the most amount that I think relates mostly to F1 compared to FC that has just a bunch of stuff they felt like they need to throw in because it's a football game, right? So in this case, for F1 racing, you have things like a full career mode as is typical, but you also have a full story mode, as well as a F1 the movie, which is reliving parts of the movie, and then you have F1 World, which is where you get into your series races, time trials, Grand Prix, the kind of tutorial serialization of that, ranked goals, all that stuff. You have a full customizable garage. The F1 World stuff also has sort of an RPG system in terms of the upgrades that you can get, garage, trophies, looking at that, all that. And so while I believe that FC 25 has more like cups and more things that are maybe related to soccer in it, in terms of the quality and cohesiveness of the content, I would definitely say that F1 25 absolutely would take the cake there, just in terms of how much it feels like they really paid attention to, you know, what the zeitgeist of F1 is in terms of like collaborations with the F1 movie and sort of the time trials and things that are very nice. So for content, absolutely the game gets a 5 out of 5. We'll now move on to the gameplay. I'm going to have to give F1 25 gameplay a 5 out of 5 as well, because while I believe there are some issues in terms of just usability and kind of accessibility when a lot of these things are kind of geared towards like racing wheels and stuff, I will absolutely say that I am infinitely impressed by not only the amount of options that you have, which a lot of these other games do have, but most importantly, how they lay it out. Similar to the praise I gave with Madden, where it had a couple of different modes you could kind of tune to kind of auto-select some of the settings, this has that as well. And it's not just in things like basic user and CPU difficulty like FC has, it's in things like what amount of tuning do you have to do to the car? What amount of controls do you need to know to be able to do this race? What's the level of involvement you need to have. And it does that directly from the outset, which I think is quite interesting. The first time you get to the settings menu in this game, you are selecting what your comfortability level and comfort level is. Are you a casual? Are you kind of in the middle? Or are you a pro? And that immediately helps because then it gears all the menus around that. Everything in the menu from a casual perspective is stuff I can understand. And if you go into the higher ones, it's more complicated. That is a much better system than the other games, which tend to be like, hey, here's all these settings that you'll eventually maybe look at if you look up a guide on how to do the settings for your game, right? This is a much better approach that just says, hey, what's your comfort level? And we'll adjust what you can see in the settings for that. And you can go in and change it if you want. I think that's a much better outcome and approach. And because of that, I have to give the gameplay, just in terms of like an accessibility standpoint, a 5 out of 5. Obviously, we have to talk about things like controls, which do depend on what you're playing on. I was playing on controller, so the controls are pretty simple. You have B to select your kind of like options in the menu there. You have your standard triggers for acceleration and brake. You have your D-pad to adjust certain values like that. The right stick moves the camera, and the left stick, I don't believe, moves anything. And then there's some other tactics things you can do there. So it's a pretty simple control scheme, at least the one I am playing. You can obviously, as mentioned, make it more complicated or make it more involved if you would like to through that option there in the settings. But from a just pure controls perspective, it works very well. In terms of tutorials, I think this game has a decent, albeit a little bit odd tutorial system. The F1 world is really your tutorial thing. What is F1 world? And it goes, talks you through that. I also appreciate how the tutorials talk about things when you need them and you click on them instead of just preemptively. That is very nice. But I would say that they're, very glowing box, click on the thing tutorials, which don't really work as well for actually getting you used to the systems at play. So I would have liked some other tutorials that maybe were less hand-holdy, not in to say the like FC sterile way, but definitely in a way that allows you to kind of play with it a little bit more than necessarily clicking on the glowing box that the NPC told you kind of things. But overall, I would say the tutorials are nice because there is a lot of options for tutorialization depending on how far you want to go into it. And they are relatively well designed and intuitive, and that does go a long way. If controls are intuitive, you can kind of pick it up like Madden and be like, oh, okay, this isn't that weird, or NBA. But if they're quite obtuse or irritating, then it can definitely hurt the experience quite a bit quicker than if it is intuitive. So naturally, the game here having intuitive functional controls where you can just hop in, it feels nice. It feels nice to be able to do that. Obviously, in terms of general gameplay, it's a racing game, primarily simulation based, so you're going to be going around very circular tracks. I'm sure there's a way to get out a third-person camera, but right now it's a first-person perspective. I'm sure there's a way to do like a third-person or like a isometric view or something if you wanted. But I did the gameplay here in first person, and that felt very good. And so that I think for gameplay, we just have to give it a 5 out of 5. So we'll move on to the technical, pricing, and age now. Let's talk about technical, pricing, and age, starting with technical. So this game is quite interesting because it's one of the few games that includes or gives you the ability to do path tracing. I'll start off by saying for the technical that there's a lot of settings you can adjust in terms of graphics and stuff. So it does really feel like it's a PC first and a PC focused experience because it lets you adjust a lot of things relating to both the audio and accessibility stuff, but also more importantly, the graphical settings that you're under, which is very nice. There's a lot of things you can adjust there, including the ability to use path tracing. And because I have a 4080, I'm going to do that. So you may notice that this game is running at a considerably lower frame rate than these other games do. I'm not holding that against it because, again, I'm using path tracing to simulate the rays in this game. So you're going to see the frame rate dip to like 45 in instances where I'm not necessarily racing. But I did want to report that while I am racing and while the actual things you need to be controlling is going on, I'm getting around 75 to 85 FPS, which I think is pretty good, especially with everything set to max, ray tracing on all the stuff, and path tracing on. It's a very intensive procedure, and so I'm okay with being in the 80 FPS mark. What I was more impressed with is how it is operating on all the other statistics there in terms of utilization and the temperatures, which were quite low. for what this game is pumping out visually, which looks very good. I would say in terms of sports games, obviously racing games are known for being very graphically impressive, and this is absolutely up there in terms of the quality, but you do pay for that, both in terms of the size, it being an 85 gigabyte game, but also in terms of just how demanding it can be, especially if you turn on something like path tracing, but it does look very good. The kind of character models don't look as good, but the cars and the tracks and all that look fantastic, so that is very nice. And because of those options on the technical side, I have to give it another 5 out of 5. So now we get to talking about pricing. And this is one of the interesting things about the F1 series, and that is the fact that while it is available, the previous F1 24 on EA Play, in order to get the newest one, F1 25, you have to go to the EA Play free trial, which is about 5 hours, and then pay full price $70 for it. Historically, if we look at other games like F1 24, and we can check the price there, it does appear that these don't go on sale for nearly as much. Don't go for sale as nearly as much. Never mind, I don't know what I'm talking about. $10.50. Look at that. $10.50 for F1 24. Now, for whatever reason, F1 24 has a lower score than F1 25, but it is being sold for $10, 85% off for this kind of game, with a pretty good player peak like that. And then in terms of the sale chart, it's 40, 35, 28, 29, $10 come this year, which obviously was about when the new one came out. But yeah, it's about $10 here. So it does go on a pretty big discount. Again, these games are live entry, so I don't really think that anything you can get these games for that's lower than the original price is a good thing. Obviously, like with some other games, if you're getting the previous version of them, they tend to not go on sale once the new one has come out, so you're going to be paying full price for it. But just know that this game did go on sale for $10, so you can expect the new one, the F1 25, to go on sale for about that much as well. Going on to that, I would probably say that because you can get it for 85% off and the amount of content that typically is offered this kind of game, I have to give pricing another 5 out of 5. And so let's talk about age here. Age is definitely one thing that you have to be aware of with these games. Can you still buy them? Things like F1 have licensing stuff, so let's see. If you try and go for F1 24, can you still buy this game? $70 current converted price. It does look like you can still play the game and buy the game, and it is at 2,200 people currently, so that's pretty good. Can you buy F1 23? You cannot currently buy F1 23. It has been retired and no longer available. However, there is still people playing it. It is now good to know and check to see if you can get this game on EA system. If it doesn't even show up, it doesn't show up, so I don't believe you'll be able to find it. Okay, so because of that, I'll have to give age 1 out of 2, similar to what I did with NBA, where while you can buy the previous version, even though it's no longer on sale, you cannot buy the version before that. It has been retired, which means age will get a 1 out of 2. Overall, I would say this is probably the highest score you'll most likely see on this list of stuff, but that does not necessarily mean it's the one you should be getting, because this is the objective rating. So objectively, F1 25 would be on all the categories the best one, but from an actual personal perspective and from, depending on your affinity for certain things, you may think racing games are boring and so not choose a racing game. But in terms of the adding up the scores here, it does seem like F1 25 is at that top caliber there. So we'll now be moving on to talking about the last game that we have yet to talk about, which is WWE 2K25 Wrestling. Okay, the final one we're looking at is WWE 2K25. Now, this is a really interesting one to talk about in terms of content, because I was originally going to give this a 3 out of 5 because it didn't seem like there was anything special going on. And then I looked a little bit deeper into the universe mode and the play section and found a lot more content. So I think for content, I would give this game probably a 5 out of 5, honestly. You have your standard, my career mode. You have your showcase, which is kind of like your challenges section. You have your my faction, which is like your ultimate team. And then you have your my GM, which is your general manager, kind of like a sports manager thing if you want that. But then in the play section is where I really got impressed, because all that's relatively standard, right? Your ultimate team stuff and your my career are standard modes you would expect in these kind of games. Your challenges are pretty normal. The GM stuff was in the other games we looked at. So none of that's kind of surprising. What is surprising is when you hit the play button and how many game mode options there are. There's 27 different modes in this game, from obviously your normal, your tag team, your elimination, your knockout, your cage match, your various rules, items like chairs and stuff. Like, there's so much here in terms of variety of different game options that you have that I was quite impressed. On top of the things you have in the normal play menu, you also have the creations. Now, this is more of the online creation hub stuff, but you can create your own custom characters, custom signs, custom arenas and showrooms and stuff. It is quite an expansive list of player-created stuff, and it's all laid out relatively well on top of the standard online modes, ranked modes, that kind of thing. But I was quite impressed by not only the amount of modes in the play area there, but as well as the kind of way that they set up all the creation stuff. There is quite a lot of content here that I was actually impressed about. Because at first glance, you look at it, and the assumption is that, it's a standard, multiplayer set, or not multiplayer, standard like single player suite, I guess, or content suite. And then you kind of dig into it a little bit more and realize, wow, there's a lot here. Not only in terms of the play mode, but also in the simulation mode, which is like universe. There's things like rivalries that's quite unique to this game specifically, and being able to set up rivalries between people and get cash out for that. And there's also just a couple of unique mechanics that are more geared towards wrestling, right, that I thought really made this quite unique. On top of it's hidden in the settings menu, but there is a normal like tutorial. I thought Showcase was going to be tutorial because that's like where a lot of these tend to be, like the challenge section. There's a separate practice arena that's in the options menu that will teach you the game. But in terms of content, I would absolutely have to give this a 5 out of 5 for just the amount that is here. And it seemingly is all high quality as well. Nothing kind of like thrown in for the sake of it, which is very nice. So now that we've established that, let's move on to the gameplay, which is another big surprise here. So into the gameplay of this game now, where we talk about things like controls, tutorial, all that stuff. What I actually want to start off first, and what I was most impressed by, is presentation. We haven't really talked about presentation throughout most of this because most of the games are, it's soccer, it's basketball, it's football, it's what have you. Like, the presentation all across the board for these games has been pretty decent, nothing crazy or anything. But this time the presentation really stands out. Obviously, it's wrestling, right? It's WWE. You're kind of expecting it to go all out, but I didn't really expect the dynamicism in both the like intro and entrance stuff, the way the music kind of correlates to that, right? A lot of these games for music just have like random music going on in the background. These feel like pretty tailored to each character, as well as like the arena they're in and maybe some of the background stuff. Like, it all feels very tied together. On top of the standard things you'd expect from WWE, like that entrance and like the character introductions and stuff, you have some really impressive presentation when it comes to the gameplay. Not only in terms of like the character animations, which are quite impressive. I was quite surprised by just the level that I don't see things clipping. A lot of the time in these kind of games that are very character centric, you're going to see a lot of clipping, a lot of weird movements. You didn't really see any of that here. A lot of the like way that all of the characters connect, which is obviously a very critical part of making this game feel real and feel good, is that like presentation value in terms of the animations, and they knocked it out of the park. I was quite impressed with that, especially compared to older WWE games that definitely did not have that. So that was very nice in this current one. And then for like controls, really impressed with the controls in terms of just like how easy it is to pick up. There are some things you will have to learn, similar to something like FC, but it does a much better job of not only showcasing what the controls are, but also making them pretty intuitive. You have your grab on B, you have your normal hit on A, and then your heavier hit on X, or I think it's X, one of those two. I think it's A for light, X for heavy. You have your Y, and then you have like your bumper, your triggers. So like right trigger plus X, Y, and A will do either a finisher or a like a signature move or something like that, and they all have their signature moves which work well. And then you have your directional inputs, holding back or holding forward to activate there. So it's a relatively normal control scheme that I think works well. There is something to kind of get used to in terms of the timing, as well as you are animation locked into a lot of moves, meaning you're not going to, it's not like a typical fighting game where you're like animation canceling move into move into move kind of thing. You are pretty much stuck with what you're doing. a lot of the time, but it's not that bad considering that's kind of how the game is set up. So it's almost like not a turn-based game or anything like that, but it is set up more like that than other fighting games, if you would qualify this as. But overall, the controls are very nice. Going on tutorials, I was quite impressed by not only just the tutorials of how it operated, but I was going to say I was impressed by the tutorials. I'm impressed by the setup of the tutorials and what they showcase, not necessarily the tutorial implementation themselves. I think they could have done a lot more with making it a little bit easier to understand some of the input showcasing that they're doing, either through a demo or through some other way to show how to do some of these things. Because one issue I had during the tutorial was figuring out like when the move could be done, because like it would say, hey, press forward and press the X button or whatever, right? Or like press X and then forward and then the B button to like grab with B and then move it up with Y as you're moving back or forward. But it wouldn't work if the opponent was on the ground. They had to be like standing up or something, or it would do a different attack, and it wouldn't tell you, like it doesn't showcase the names of the moves anywhere. So you're kind of just like hoping that this thing that you aren't aware of is like the thing you're supposed to do. So that was a little bit of annoying trying to get that kind of worked out. But once you did that, it is satisfying to do those moves, and it is pretty self-explanatory. But overall, tutorials definitely aren't a strong suit of the game. What is a strong suit, as you can probably see here, is the actual gameplay. Not only from a just variety perspective, but also from a how good it feels. This is a very responsive game. Something that I've always been impressed by in these kind of games is the responsiveness of pretty much all the games we've tested other than FC, which is quite interesting. FC feels like you're controlling a tugboat. Everything else here feels like you're controlling like an actual character. Even Madden, which had some issues relating to its controls, was able to feel way more responsive than FC. But this game does as well. This game is very responsive. Character movement feels great. Even in a game like this where you are more animation locked than most other sports games, it doesn't feel that obtrusive, because a lot of the time like your buttons are responding to what you're doing. And I think that's the critical part, is like once you get into an animation and it's working, you know that your button press has worked. And some big issue with the animation locking that happened in FIFA or FC is that you didn't have that. You didn't have a confirmation that what you were doing was actually working to any capacity. It was just kind of like, I hope it's working. You can kind of see the ball moving a little bit differently. But in every game since then, especially this game, because of how the characters are, it's very easy to tell when a button press is activated or not, right? Which is very nice. Other things relating to gameplay, the ability to climb the cage was quite interesting. In some of the ones, the way that worked, there is a lot of like quick time events and things in the game, but I didn't notice that being like a really big issue, because overall, like they're relatively self-explanatory and they're well telegraphed, which is great. It's really annoying when you end up having like a bunch of these quick time events and they just like appear somewhere on the screen and you can't tell what it is or what you're supposed to be doing. So these are relatively, they name them like, hey, this is the button you press if you want to do an instant recovery. Here's the button you press if you want to do a counter, right? That kind of thing. So I found that quite good. So overall, in terms of gameplay, other than the fact that the tutorials were kind of lacking, I would have to give gameplay here a 4 out of 5. Can't quite give it that 5 out of 5 because there is some issues relating to being able to actually control the character movement, especially if you also want to be able to control like the camera and stuff. The camera can kind of get in the way a lot of the time and obstruct your view, as well as get a little bit disorientating depending on what cage you are in for actually being able to see and control your character. So that was a little bit annoying at times when I'm like trying to see what my character's doing and the view you have is like outside the cage, so you're kind of looking into the cage and the cage is a cage, so it's like kind of messing with your vision. So that was kind of annoying, but pretty much other than that, I would say everything else with the gameplay works quite well, and so I'd give it a 4 out of 5 there. Next up, we're going to be talking about the technical pricing and age of the game. So unfortunately, this is kind of where we get into the less good aspects. We gave content a 5, we gave the gameplay a 4. Unfortunately, we have to now go down to a 3 for technical. Not because there's anything necessarily wrong with the technical performance, but because it is locked at 60 FPS at all times and even goes down to 30 when in cutscenes and there's nothing you can do about that, and there's not a ton of options to be able to change to make that go higher or anything like that. When you start the game up, it does warn you about this, but that is definitely just something to know, that there is no, nothing you can do to change that. It's 30 FPS locked, even if you change the event camera to 60 FPS, and also everything else is at 60. It's designed for that, it's fine, it makes sense, but it's a little bit disappointing that on a PC release you don't have higher frame rates or higher graphical options, because while I do think the game looks nice in a lot of aspects, some things like hair simulation and stuff do look a little bit off. So it would have been nice to have things to adjust that in a PC game, but unfortunately we do not get any of that, so I have to give technical a 3 out of 5. Moving on to pricing now is an interesting one, because like with all these games, if you were to look it up, WWE 2K25, if you were to look up the current version of the game, you'll see it is lowest price has been recorded, and this came out in March of 2025. So the 2025 moniker is being used correctly for the 2025 release year. So the lowest, because it came out a couple months ago, 6 months ago at this point, the lowest it's ever been is $36. This is a tough one, because do I recommend this game at $36? I think if you are the type of person to like this kind of thing and like fighting games in general, you probably would want to pick this up for $36 for pricing wise, but it's also going to depend on how much you do things like the Ultimate Team mode, right? Because as we all know, those Ultimate Team modes can get quite expensive if you want to delve into it. Luckily, all the other stuff you want to do does not relate to that Ultimate Team, but it is, something that if you're going to play the My Faction mode, then you're going to want to maybe take that into consideration when you're looking at the pricing. But right now, the lowest price that had been recorded is $36. So because of that, I will give pricing a 3 out of 5. However, this will go up if you can buy the previous 2K24. You can buy the previous 2K24, and it does look like the lowest that has ever gone is $15, and I would say $15 is a better price. So if 2K25 goes down to that $15 as well, then it'll get bumped up to a 4 out of 5. Right now, however, it is at a 3 out of 5 because the value there is dependent. One thing I will say, though, it is still a $60 game versus a $70 game. The most recent one is still also at $60, so they haven't made the jump to $70, which is very nice, and I do kind of respect them for that. But that doesn't mean that the pricing can magically increase. I would still say it's a 3 out of 5 for pricing, but if this new WWE does go down to like $15, then you should absolutely pick it up for that. But because it hasn't and the lowest price is still relatively high, the only thing I can really give this in terms of value for pricing is a 3 out of 5. But the last one is age, and this is all dependent on if you can buy the previous versions. So we have WWE 2K24. As I looked up, it's still being sold. It is players online, not a ton on the Steam version, but there is crossplay, so there's not any worry about that. $15 lowest price, $60 currently. Because the new one's out, again, these are typically not going to go on sale again, but it did get to $15 once and then was at a $20 mark. So it doesn't seem to be going on sale for as much, but you can still buy the previous one if you would like. And let's see, can you buy the one before 2K23? Unfortunately, as is tradition for these games, you cannot buy the second previous version, and because of that, I have to give this a 1 out of 2 for age. My guideline is basically if you can buy the current version and the 2 previous, it gets a full point. And if you can only buy the last year's version but not the year before, it gets 1 point. So if you can't buy any of them, or there's some other issue that prevents you from being able to play them, then that's 0. So in this case, age gets a 1 out of 2 there. So I'll add up all these scores for all of the games here, and then we'll get you with a final objective ranking and see where everything kind of wraps up there. So thank you for watching at least this part, and we'll end off with a large ranking. Here we go. All right, we're back on the chart here that we started off with. If you want my personal ranking of these games, let's see. I still think 2K25 is up there. F1, I would actually change it to being 2K25, F1. I think I would probably put this one probably here, and then I would move you down here. I really didn't like FC. Put Madden there. This is probably where I'd put my... God damn it, I hate how Madden's stupid fucking logo is so big. There we go. All right, this is probably the final list here. So if you saw the start of the list, it was a little bit shuffled around. This is, I think, the actual list of what I have after further reflection. 2K, NBA 2K still at the top. And then I think it's F1, Topspin, the wrestling one, Madden, FC, and PGA Golf Tour. I was not, as I think I mentioned, able to get college football, NHL, UFC, or MLB The Show because they are console exclusive for some stupid reason. I know some of them are like hockey doesn't sell well, so that makes sense, but it is kind of annoying to not be able to test all of them on PC. But this would be my personal ranking for all of them. However, that is not the objective ranking. But because I am limited on time here, what I'm going to do is show you the categories for each one. I did talk about each of these games in each of these categories, so you can go to the previous timestamps to check those out. And for the ranking, every category got 5 points, plus 2 points for the age for a total of 22 points. Here are the games listed here. And in editing, because I have to now go through every single one of my little sections here and tally up all the points there and give you a final score. So I will do that in post and show them here in this little area here. So by the time you're seeing this, it should showcase each of these, and then at the end here, I'll show you which one, from an objective perspective, trying to be as objective as possible, which one got on top. So once again, these up here are my personal ranking. So which one do I believe non-sports fans should pick? It's NBA, and then the list goes down from there. However, an objective ranking based on these categories would be what you're seeing here, which is what's going to be shown in post. So, you know, these aren't necessarily in order, but if you see a score of like 90% here, then you'll know that, okay, this is near the top, right? So that's just how that's going to work. Hopefully, by giving you a both objective ranking and a subjective ranking, you're able to kind of use the two to figure out what you actually are interested in, because the entire goal of the video is to kind of showcase and show that, you know, all these games are different, and hopefully I was able to showcase that. But when you kind of boil them down to some fundamental things, they're all pretty similar in terms of what they're offering and what they're trying to do. But there's definitely some standouts and some losers here. So hopefully you can see that through the score distribution. Hopefully I did the score distribution well. I chose 22 points because I was trying to make it sort of analogous to being like, if you got like a 20 out of 22, that's like still relatively high, right? Because age is something that you can't necessarily control. So I kind of wanted to balance it out. So hopefully I did that. And hopefully the scores you're seeing here are reflective of that. But if you enjoyed this kind of thing and want to see more longer form kind of analytical deep dives into various bunches of games like I did for my MMO video where I reviewed like 7 different MMOs and kind of compared those, as well as this video where I did that for sports. If you want to see more of that stuff, or you're just interested in other various reviews, make sure to subscribe to the channel. It's free. Make sure to hit the like button, comment down below, get that engagement up. And I want to thank you everyone for watching this video, and I'll see everyone in the next video.